So this week's Parshat Vaeira is my Bar Mitzvah Parsha, and it occupies a place close to my heart for a few reasons. One is because Vaeira introduces freedom and redemption to the world. And it's the Parsha where Moshe, God's emissary on earth, and possibly the least power-hungry man ever, comes to dominate Pharaoh, the symbol and physical manifestation of enslaving power in the world. For this reason, and also due to current events around the world, I'd like to therefore talk about leadership and the nature of power. In last week's Parsha, we witnessed the conversation between God and Moshe in the episode of the burning bush. God is telling Moshe, "You're my guy," and Moshe is arguing, "No, I'm not the guy. Who am I to talk to Pharaoh? I can't talk. They won't listen. They won't believe me." 100 excuses he has. Moshe wasn't talking to an executive recruiter or a political operative trying to recruit him to run for office. Moshe was talking to God. You would think this would be enough to convince Moshe that he really is the guy, but it wasn't enough. He didn't stop arguing until the wrath of God came down upon him. Literally, the Torah says the wrath of God burned on him, and only then does he stop arguing. At any rate, you see how this job was literally the last thing Moshe wanted in his life. And then in this week's Parsha, you see multiple times where he tried to back out. Anytime there was a setback, he would tell God he was unsuitable for the job. The Medrash says God chose Moshe because of how kindly he treated his sheep as a shepherd. The Torah testifies that Moshe was the humblest man to ever live, and I think it's unquestionable that this is as important a factor in his suitability for the role as is his kindness. We see also how the first king of Israel, Shaul HaMelech, was super humble. He didn't feel capable or worthy of being made king when Shmuel came to him and anointed him. He wasn't looking for a position of leadership, and it took quite a bit of time for him to ease into the job. And likewise, with the true king of Israel, God's chosen one, King David, when Shmuel came looking for the new king, they didn't even tell Shmuel about him. So off the radar was he to his family as a possible king. The mark of a true and moral leader is someone that is not seeking the job. The last Lubavitcher Rebbe famously in 1950 tried to get out of the job for a year before finally stepping up. And lahavdil, George Washington also did not look for the job, but was drafted both as the general of the army and then as president. And he insisted on retiring after 2 terms and not being made into a king, which was actually offered to him. And I have no doubt that the Mashiach will also be drafted or anointed rather than just showing up and saying he's in charge. In fact, God may be arguing with him right now and insisting he show himself. On the other hand, the pharaohs were completely different. They married their siblings to keep the power in the family, and it was common for siblings to kill each other to seize power. The royal family was in a constant state of flux where only the most ruthlessly power-hungry would survive. And it was designed this way so that the most powerful would self-select and be the king, like the jungle. And Egypt itself typifies power. The ancient pyramids that have survived to this day signify this power with their shape, which has a massive base and comes to a point on top. Egypt and the pharaohs are the opposing force to true and moral leadership. Why is it important for a true leader to not be seeking the job? Why do we say that power corrupts? The leader is chosen to bring people together around the shared goal, whether it's to build a nation or free them from slavery, or even to run a company. These are people that articulate a vision for the group and marshal the group resources to get to the goal. A true leader and his people are all working towards the same goal, and there is very little that can stop that group. On the other hand, an individual that wants to be in charge and seeks the job is by definition less interested in the goal than the power that comes with being in charge. When a person like this is in charge, then the whole enterprise is in danger. There is no longer a true focus on the goals, but rather the stated goals of the group only become a smokescreen for the true agenda, which is the power and wealth of the so-called leaders. We see this dynamic with many groups, including, unfortunately, in our religious communities, where the leaders cover up scandals to protect the organization or use the organization to enrich or further empower themselves and their allies. This is the definition of corruption, where protecting the organization or the influential enhancing their power and health comes before truth and morality, which is the stated purpose of their religious organization. The only way such organizations that have power-hungry leaders rather than true leaders continue to survive is based on the systems that have been put in place to control the corruption. For example, the USA has a constitution and a separation of powers, which, although very battered already and on its last legs, still has some small ability to at least make the corrupt try to hide a little bit. Likewise, companies have to answer to shareholders on a quarterly basis and therefore can't completely turn themselves into vehicles for their leadership's personal wealth and power. And religious institutions have to retain at least a veneer of morality, or else their people would abandon the organization. So it's a balancing act. But when you have a true leader that believes in the mission and is not in it for wealth or power, but only to get to the goal, then magic happens. Then freedom reigns over tyranny, spirit reigns over fear, and the world is redeemed from a state of corruption and power seeking to one of peace and harmony. We live in a time where the tyranny and corruption is being laid bare for all to see in all of our institutions, religious, political, medical, military, business, sports, academic. It's sickening when I look at leaders of all organizations, both in Israel and the USA. The truth is, throughout history, it was always like this. Corruption sneaks its way in the second there is a power structure, and it is impossible to build anything or accomplish a purpose without a power structure. But just as Moshe Rabbeinu, the consummate moral leader that was drafted against his will, totally annihilated Pharaoh in Egypt, the manifestation of power structures in our world, so too will the Mashiach, who we all yearn for, annihilate these corrupt leaders and power structures and usher our world into a perfected state where the new organizations that are built will be strong enough to accomplish their purpose, but not too strong where they become tyrannical or corrupt. May it be soon in our days. Shabbat Shalom from Renana, Israel.